你好，到那边
好，坐下来再说啊。
Yes, I met with Professor Haipei. Yes, thank you so much for organizing and putting this together.
Texas is my home too! Texas is my home too!
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the first one of the two webinar series. My name is Stephen Pei from the Battleground in Texas. I would like to thank all of you for supporting our efforts in Texas. However, this is no longer and was never a Texas-only issue. Some of you may know me that I'm the founding chair of United Chinese Americans. However, I'm here today speaking as a co-organizer of APA Justice to introduce our partners, Haipei Shue, founder and the president of United Chinese Americans, and Keliang, founder and executive director of the 1882 Foundation. He will say a few words about the second webinar of this series at the end of today's webinar. As you all know, the Chinese Exclusion Act was signed by President Chester Arthur in 1882. It was not until 2011, Haipei, Ted, and several other Asian American community leaders worked closely with Congresswoman Judy Shue to have the U.S. Congress pass the resolution expressing the regret for the passing of discriminatory laws against the Chinese in America, including the Chinese Exclusion Act. Therefore, it's particularly meaningful to have all three of them here today. Congresswoman, would you please share your thoughts with us?
With Japan led to the stripping of property ownership rights from Japanese immigrants, leading to the incarceration of 120,000 Japanese Americans. It's simply unacceptable and unconscionable that we would be talking about a bill that does more of the same today in 2023. I want to be clear. There are legitimate national and economic security concerns that the United States faces with these specific foreign governments. And to ensure we are addressing these concerns, we in CAPAC are not opposing limits on these types of entities from making purchases of land or property, that is, from their governments. But what we do staunchly object to is any legislation at the federal, state, or local level that bars an individual from property ownership solely based on their country of origin. As tensions continue to rise, I know that many in our communities worry that we will be collateral damage in the escalation of our competition with China. And our history shows us that what starts with one supposedly innocuous restriction in the name of economic or national security can be the start of a slippery slope in violating civil rights of our communities, just like we have seen before. At this moment of heightened US-China tensions, and as we in Congress remain vigilant in protecting our national and economic security, CAPAC will use its power to raise our voices and ensure that we are not eroding the civil liberties of individuals in our communities. And this is not the first time we've done this before. In 2021, we fought back against an amendment that a Republican Congress member wanted to put into the fiscal year 2022 agricultural appropriations bill, barring all Chinese nationals from owning U.S. agricultural land. Because of our protests, it was finally changed to barring only the Chinese companies that are wholly or partially owned by the government of China. Today, CAPAC is just as prepared to push back against similar policies brought forth on the federal level in the 118th Congress, our current Congress. In fact, just earlier this week, our leadership released a joint statement expressing our deep concerns on these efforts. And we have CAPAC members on the ground in Texas, such as Congressmember Al Green and Congresswoman Lizzie Fletcher, as well as CBC member Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, who are standing with the Chinese American communities in Houston and have been showing up and speaking out loudly on this issue. As chair of CAPAC, I pledge that we will continue to fight for our communities, including Chinese Americans across the country, because no one should be prevented from getting a fair shot at building their lives here in America because of their country of origin. I look forward to strengthening our partnership with all of you to ensure this continues to be a country inclusive of all people and where everybody is treated equally. Thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman. I think we really appreciate taking the time to talk to all of us, in particular from those from Houston. We really appreciate that. If you can stay, that would be wonderful. But let's move on to State Representative Jin Wu. I think since the beginning, Jin Wu has been leading the whole effort in the whole state of Texas. He is supporting everyone. You can look at him. He's pretty tired because working continuously over the past months. And Jin has been state rep for 6 terms already and has been in that position for over 10 years now. And Jin, would you please tell the audience what is going on in Texas?
Thank you so much, Stephen. And Congressman Shue, it's a truly an honor to be on this panel with you. Been a big fan of yours for a long time. So thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time. So, we actually didn't find out about this bill kind of recently. The bill actually filed back in November, but because the way it was drafted, it was kind of like it hid itself away until Governor Abbott tweeted out about it, and then people started taking a closer look. And when I was notified of it and I took a look at it, I was floored about how extreme and how egregious this legislation was. And I think there's a lot of people who may not fully understand what the ramifications are of this legislation and what it means to the community. But let me put it this way: the senator who's carrying this bill in her public statements to the press consistently say that this is their effort to limit the acquisition of Texas land by adversarial nations and agents. But at the same time, their legislation affects every single immigrant from these 4 countries. And what that really needs to be made clear for everyone listening is that they're very out front saying that they are treating every immigrant, every refugee, every lawful resident, every visa holder, everyone who is from these countries as an enemy of this nation. And that's a really, really dangerous type of statement. And that, you don't have to read between the lines. This is actually what they're saying. And, I'm not sure if they have lined up what they're saying with what's in the bill. You said this type of legislation is not new. We've been fighting this kind of stuff for well over 140 years. And is this just the same type of philosophy and idea over and over again? Back in the 1800s, back in the early 1900s, Indian land laws. The reason they passed them, especially in Texas, was because Chinese immigrants were moving into the south of Texas and buying up farmland to farm, because that's all they knew how to do. And people looked at them and said, those people are very strange. They speak weird languages. They look really different. They eat kind of weird foods, and they can't possibly be Americans. They can't possibly be one of us. They can't possibly assimilate and join our society. So therefore, we don't want them as our neighbors. And so Texas passed laws that said Chinese and Japanese people were not allowed to own land in the state. And many, many other states followed suit. So this, what we have here, what we have here is essentially the same thing. Now, they don't say like they can't assimilate anymore, but they say, well, everyone from those countries, from these 4 countries, every immigrant, whether they're running from the government or not, is a potential spy for that government. And I think there's needs to be a sense of, for us, a sense of irony to understand this is like, if you're North Korean, if you're Iranian and you're in the US, because we have no diplomatic relationship with either of those 2 countries, you're a refugee from those countries. You are fleeing for your life from North Korea, from Iran, and to come here and to be discriminated against as a punishment for the actions of the government you just fled from is I think, a special type of injustice. And it would be funny, it would be ironic if it wasn't so harmful and just so damaging to our entire community. And one of the big things, just as Congresswoman Shue said, my big concern about this is not this legislation. My concern is about the continuing rise of anti-Asian hate. And this hate will now, and I know for the Iranian community, for the Muslim community, for the Middle Eastern community, they've already experienced it. They've already felt the pain of this. And our community is now feeling that is government-sanctioned hatred. This type of legislation is point blank saying to people, hey, all those people you're afraid of, all those people you kind of have ill feelings about, you're right. We agree with you. The government agrees with you. And in not so many words, this type of legislation, even if it passes, even if it's struck down by the courts, if it passes, it becomes a green light. It becomes a green light to all those who want to find a reason to spread hate and spread violence. And that's the real danger of this stuff. That's the real danger. It's not politics, it's not policy, but the real danger is worrying about whether my mom's going to get accosted when she goes grocery shopping, whether somebody's going to try to harm my boys. And, as I talk to my wife, because people know where I live, whether somebody's going to drive in front of my house and start shooting because they see an Asian person and they automatically think spy, they automatically think traitor, they automatically think enemy, because that's what the law says. Then did we lose Stephen?
Haipei?
Yep.
Would you please unmute yourself? Then you can take over. You are unmute.
Okay. Yeah, I couldn't get in as a panelist for some reasons I could add. So I've been listening to all this time from a car. I apologize. My flight was delayed for more than 2 hours. Thanks for Jing for your as my words are haunting and powerful speech. That's something that we all need to think about, how this can go from a legislative body down to the society as a whole. I think next in line will be the president from Iranian American Council, Jamal. Thank you so much for your community to step up, and we have been working together for many other issues too. Glad to see you here.
Thank you so much for having me. Obviously, I wish we were convening under better circumstances, but I'm just so grateful for this coalition, for your organizations, for Representative Wu and his just tenacious efforts to oppose this legislation. And I couldn't agree more with his comments. And I think that, if anything, we should treat this as a moment to make our community stronger and to forge these alliances as a matter of necessity, to build political power together, to not just defend our community's rights and our allied community's rights, but defend all American rights and all immigrant rights. And this is such a fundamental issue. So building off of Representative Wu's comments, we see sort of three big problems with this bill beyond just the fact of the policy. One, as has been mentioned, this is Texas specific, but this is part of a national trend and is a national campaign where I think Texas is right now the beachhead to try to shut this down before it metastasizes and becomes copycat. That copycat legislation arises in different states, different legislatures, and eventually federal legislation potentially gets passed. Or we have a presidential administration which follows in the footsteps of the Trump administration and by executive order passes measures like this into U.S. policy. So stopping this here in Texas right now is really vital. The second issue is that a lot of people will say, this is unconstitutional, this violates fundamental rights of Americans, and so the courts will shut this down. But as we have learned, unfortunately, most recently with the example of the Muslim ban that the Trump administration put into place, we can't depend on the courts to save us. And especially with the composure of the Supreme Court today, I have even less confidence that that we can depend on our rights being protected in that way. And so I think we have to have, if necessary, if this does become law in Texas, if this does become law elsewhere, but it's really vital that we have a political victory because we can't depend on those legal protections. And then the third is really what the representative was saying, is the chilling effect that this has. When you have the imprimatur of the state, of the government for discrimination, for racism and treating people differently based on their national origin, it has a trickle-down effect. It comes with a stamp of approval that many in society look at as validation for themselves engaging in this type of discrimination and becoming, vigilante enforcers of the government's discriminatory laws and regulations. For Iranian Americans, there have been a number of immigration and economic discrimination issues over recent years that have been put into mostly in federal law and federal policy, not as a result of anything that Iranian Americans have done, but as a result of supposedly tensions among governments and the inability of our government in these cases to distinguish between a government and a people and Americans who happen to hail from the country with whom our government has tensions with. Just a couple of examples of this. In 2015, legislation was offered, HR 158, which said that dual nationals from Iran and Syria and other countries that the U.S. has designated as state sponsors of terror that dual nationals would no longer be eligible for the visa waiver program. And anybody who traveled to those countries would no longer be eligible for the visa waiver program. Now, some people thought, okay, this is, in the weeds. I mean, you're not having the right to travel to the United States without a visa if you're from one of the many countries that the U.S. has visa waiver relations with. Okay, this isn't a big deal. You have to go through a couple of extra steps. And, this was a Republican-led bill. Democrats said, look, this is a compromise. It could be much worse. If we don't sign this bill that simply, tells you if you are a British doctor of Iranian descent, and you want to go on a trip to the United States for a medical conference, you're treated differently than your colleagues. You're not able to go through the visa waiver program. You have to go through special steps. But this is a compromise because the alternative would have been a total ban that was being proposed by Republicans in the House, a total ban on refugees. And it was under that rationale that Obama signed it. He said, look, I don't love this, but it's a compromise for something much worse. Well, lo and behold, a year later, there was a ban imposed on all refugees and a ban imposed on all Iranians seeking to come to the United States, as well as other Muslim majority countries under Trump's Muslim ban. And what Donald Trump said many times was, hey, Obama did it. The list of countries that we're banning, it's not from me, it's from legislation that Obama signed into law. And today, we still have this law in place. The Muslim ban has been overturned thanks to the Biden administration, and yet we still see a de facto ban in place if you travel to those countries. People are not getting visas if they travel to those countries. And so this has this tremendous chilling effect on so many other facets of our immigration system. Similarly, for Iranian Americans, sanctions, sanctions that are in place purportedly to put pressure on Iran's government to change its behavior, to hold it accountable for its many abuses of human rights and of international norms. Those sanctions, though, are so broad. They target, there's a total embargo on Iran, there's restrictions on banking. And the result is, if I want to send somebody money on Venmo, if I go out to dinner and I get cello kebab, at an Iranian restaurant, and I send somebody money on Venmo that says Persian food or anything related to Iran or being Persian or being Iranian, Venmo will literally ask me what I had for dinner. Venmo will literally freeze the transaction and contact you and say, we're not letting this transaction go through because it has these trigger words in it. And because of sanctions in US law, we have to treat you differently than we would treat any other American because of those measures. We have seen, because of these sanctions, we see banks freeze or shut down bank accounts on the thinnest amount of evidence that you may be inside of Iran at the moment. If they think that you have traveled to Iran and you're trying to operate your bank account from Iran, if they have any inclination or any inkling that this is the case, they will freeze your bank account and potentially shut it down. It's so bad that at one point a prominent think tank expert traveled to Iran, was detained by that government, put in prison, and then her bank saw it in the news and shut down her bank account. Because they said, okay, well, it's a sanctions violation if we let you have a bank account because now you're a resident of Iran. It affects us here too, people having their bank accounts shut down. I know people who, in one case, a family almost had their house foreclosed upon because the bank account that they used to pay for their mortgage got shut down. They had no awareness of this. The bank did not inform them. They said, well, we're simply complying with national security laws and restrictions. And so they almost lost their house. Now, with this Texas bill and the copycat measures, we are now having an extra layer of scrutiny just on the ability to buy that house in the first place. And I'm concerned about the impact of this on visa holders, on green card holders, but I'm also concerned about the fact that if you are Iranian American, or if you look Iranian American or Chinese American or any of the other groups targeted, first of all, it gives people a license to make that decision themselves. And second, it adds this extra layer of scrutiny where you don't get to do business the way everybody else does. You get treated differently. You have to jump through new hoops in order to prove that, yes, I am an American. Yes, I have the right to buy a house. So we are, I'm honored to be a part of this coalition. We look forward to working with you. I also have to give a shout out to the Armenian American Action Network. NIAC and the Armenian American Action Network are working on a sign-on letter that we hope to send out next week from national organizations condemning this and urging the governor to not sign this bill and urging legislature not to pass it. And we look forward to helping mobilize our community as well as the broader community that was mobilized as part of opposing the Muslim ban, the Arab American community, the Muslim American community, and others, so that we can stop this bill in its tracks and not allow this to become yet another right, yet another form of indignity that becomes codified into law, just so that a governor or a leader can score some points with the most deplorable elements of their constituency who want to see this sort of discrimination codified into law. So thanks for having me, and I look forward to the work ahead.
Thanks, Jamal. Next, my friend Clay. Clay has been a leading lawyer firm in Silicon Valley, and last year their group has taken the initiative and take on the Trump administration's ban on WeChat, a Chinese popular app, where most of the Chinese Americans in this country are on that app. It's not just Chinese. So, and they had a very successful fight on that, and that decision has been turned over by the appeals court. Clay, please, your time.
Thank you, Haipei. Let me start by a quote. The Japanese Americans are said to constitute a menace, a yellow pearl to the welfare of the state. They're said to be so disloyal and so undesirous of working for the welfare of the state that they must be denied the right to earn a living. The alien land law forbids aliens ineligible for American citizenship to acquire, own, occupy, lease, or transfer agricultural land. In our view of the case, the state has discriminated against Fred Oyama, a Japanese American. The discrimination is based solely on his parents' country of origin, and there is absent the compelling justification which would be needed to sustain discrimination of that nature. This is not something written by a lawyer just in response to the recent Texas bill. This is a ruling from the US Supreme Court 75 years ago regarding a California law prohibiting Asian Americans from owning agricultural land. So now history is repeating itself. We people from Asia are no strangers to this type of discrimination. But most of this happened about more than 100 years ago. During the American recession in the 1870s, the white so-called working men's party rose to power by getting elected with one slogan: the Chinese must go. The San Francisco Chronicle newspaper repeatedly incited the fear of the yellow pearl with headlines that read, "The Chinese invasion, they're coming, 900,000 strong." As a result, there were laws banning Chinese from becoming US citizens. There were laws requiring Chinese business owners paying a special and extra tax. And there were laws prohibiting Chinese from owning land. And this country has come far. These discriminatory laws, one by one, were invalidated or repealed in the early 20th century, including the US Supreme Court case I just cited. And since then, we had the civil rights movement and Martin Luther King, and interracial marriage finally became legal. Obstacles were finally lifted to allow Black voters to vote freely. And not too long ago, gays and lesbians were allowed to marry. And this is why I come to this country, the country of opportunity, equality, and rule of law. In 1997, I came to this country with nothing and knew nobody. And today I'm a living example of the American dream. So this is personal to me. And this is why 2.5 years ago, when President Trump issued an executive order banning the use of WeChat in this country, several colleagues of mine and I decided to work together pro bono. We sued the president and we won. We had a preliminary injunction against the sitting president, basically telling him that you have crossed the line. The legal reason we prevailed is that the WeChat ban violated the freedom of speech under the First Amendment. But the real reason that motivated me to start the fight is the executive ban of WeChat is racism in plain sight. In this country, 99.9% of WeChat users are Chinese Americans. So the WeChat ban targeted no one else but Chinese Americans. If that's not racism, then I don't know what racism is anymore. The Texas bill is the same deal. It is not about national security. It is racist. Its racist intention is quite plain. They're not shy about this. They have singled out Chinese and 3 other races. If we cannot stop this bill, what's next? Banning chopsticks and fortune cookies in the state of Texas? Maybe taking a mandatory loyalty oath before anyone can go to Panda Express? Or let's just make it simple, rounding up all Chinese for internment camps. And today I came here to speak on behalf of a nonprofit organization called the Chinese American Legal Defense Alliance, or CAUDA for short. And CAUDA's mission is to reduce and eliminate racial discrimination against Chinese Americans in this country. And if the Texas bill becomes law, CAUDA will file a lawsuit immediately. And we're prepared to take this fight all the way to the Supreme Court. Racism must be stopped. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Clay, for your passionate speech. Now we move on to David. David is a resident lawyer at ACLU of Texas. I don't need to introduce ACLU, is a household name in this country. And also specifically, our community has also benefited from ACLU's legal skills and the commitment. Just last year, ACLU has joined the fight for Sherry Chen and won that fight for her equal treatment in some district court. So here's David.
Thank you so much for having me. I've been asked as a civil rights lawyer to speak about some of the legal dimensions of this bill, which is a challenge because I think Clay actually did a great job already of doing that. But I want to talk just a little bit more about why we think SB 147 is unconstitutional. And so the first one is the heart of what Clay was articulating, that this bill is racist. It singles out members of the Chinese, North Korean, Iranian, and Russian communities, and it says that only they are not permitted to buy any property in the state of Texas. It doesn't matter who they are individually. There's no individual assessment built into this law. It just says by virtue of the fact that they have citizenship of one of these 4 countries, they cannot buy property in the state of Texas. One of the primary reasons that that is unconstitutional is the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution, which provides that all persons within a state are subject to the protection of that state, that states must provide due process of the law before depriving life, liberty, or property, and that all persons within a state's border, citizen and non-citizen alike, are entitled to equal protection of the laws. This law is a flagrant violation of the 14th Amendment guarantees to equal protection because people are being treated differently on the basis of their race and national origin, and it is a flagrant violation of the guarantee of due process. Because there is no individualized assessment, people have no process by which to show that they may purchase land in the state of Texas. I want to echo Jamal's point that even though the legal framework should be very clear, we cannot exclusively depend on the judiciary. And that's why the work that people like Representative Wu are doing is really the heart and soul of this fight. The fact that we are even talking about possible amendments to this bill is a testament to the movement that is being organized on the ground and led by communities who are going to be directly impacted by this prohibition. But the legal arguments are strong, and that's why litigation, like the litigation Mr. Shue is speaking about, is so important, because there is a fighting chance that the courts can do the right thing here. This is not a partisan issue. It's very clear. And I also want to echo the point that Representative Wu made, which is that even if this bill fails in the legislature or in the courts, it nonetheless has a powerful and dangerous effect. It greenlights discrimination. It says that people who are perceived to fit into one of these categories are inherently suspect. And you cannot reduce the stink of that kind of accusation unless you name it and unless you challenge it and dispute it. I've been asked to speak a bit about the Muslim ban as well. And as Jamal pointed out, the Supreme Court allowed the Muslim ban to stay in effect. And just as background, the Muslim ban was an executive measure by the Trump administration in its early days to prohibit persons from certain Muslim majority countries from entering the United States. And so, like the anti-Asian prohibitions of the 19th century, people who left on a plane while it was still legal for them to return to the United States, visa in hand, when they arrived, they were no longer allowed to enter. And the Supreme Court allowed that decision to stand on two bases. The first is by the time the Supreme Court ruled on the question, the Trump administration had added other nations. And so the Supreme Court allowed the Trump administration to assert that it was not exclusively a Muslim ban. We think that that decision was wrong. It was clearly a Muslim ban. Nonetheless, the Supreme Court found it important that the categorization became more neutral. And second, what's very important is that that was a measure taken by the President of the United States federal government. What Texas is doing here is flagrantly unconstitutional by that standard alone, because the foreign affairs power is vested in the President and Congress of the United States. The judiciary, the states, they do not execute foreign affairs powers. And so, Mr. Shue was speaking about cases like Oyama struck down alien land laws, and there is good reason to believe that we can challenge these here as well. We nonetheless want to uplift the racism and xenophobia of these bills, and I thank the speakers, including Congressman Shue, who raised that history, which I think is too often ignored in the way that we're brought up, especially in a place like Texas. And even if the legal issues may be different, I also want to connect this with other struggles that we're facing in the state of Texas. There is rampant anti-immigrant xenophobia at all levels of government, and it is manifesting itself in vicious ways from our border, from the state's mass arrest programs of migrants, as well as from busing of migrants. There is a movement in politics in Texas and in the United States more generally to identify immigrants and name them as the problem, thereby greenlighting discrimination, as has already been said. I'll close on another question that was posed to me before I started speaking, which is, what if the bill changes? What if it no longer becomes a prohibition on individual residents of China, Iran, North Korea, and Russia? It's a difficult question to answer because the precise changes are so important. The devil is in the details in a situation like that. But I do want to emphasize that even the fact that we're asking that question shows the power of this movement. Because it is possible to contemplate a version of this bill that strikes out its most pernicious component, even in a state like Texas, where we have Republican control of both the House and the Senate, is a testament to the voices that are being raised on the ground. And so I think I'll close with that, just as a broader thanks to all of the individuals who are here, all of the individuals who are in this Zoom or in Texas organizing on this issue. This is a collective action, and it's really an honor and a privilege to see it forming in real time.
Thank you, David. With that, we are done with our panelist presentations, and let's go to some question and answers. Steve, do you know which one is the first one that our audience has posted?
There's a question. There's a question from Cassie Lee. She wants to know, some of my friends said they agree to the terms of business entities and the foreign governments. They only want to change the section of the individual citizens. Partially agree. Should it be another option for them to wait for this bill go into committee reviews and make amendments to exclude individual citizens? So
is that who can answer that question?
Well, Jean, would you be able to respond to that one? That's very specific.
Yeah, let me it's hard to address it exactly like that. Let me put it this way. So in terms of the legislation itself, right, at least the 147, and there's other bills that are popping up as we speak. In terms of 147, even if they modify it, even if they change it, even if they cut out the portions about green card holders, it's still going to include visa holders, right? So number one, it's still saying anyone with a visa from these countries is going to be treated like a spy, going to be treated like an enemy of this country. So everybody from these countries are going to be treated as an enemy of the United States. So that's number one. Number two, that if you look at the bill itself, 147 modifies an existing protection in the law that says, in state law, that says all people in the state of Texas have equal rights in terms of buying property, right? And so even if you cut it down, you minimize it, you cut it back, at the end of the day, you still will have a law that says everyone in Texas is equal except for these people. And no matter how you cut it down, at the end of the day, a statement that says Chinese people, Iranian people, Russians, Koreans are less equal than everyone else, that's a dangerous thing to say. And I'm not even going to go into practically how this law would go into effect, meaning that like there are thousands of real estate transactions every single day in the state of Texas. And does everyone who looks Chinese, looks Korean, looks Iranian now have to carry additional ID? They have to carry their state ID plus their passport or plus their birth certificate or plus or their citizenship certificate? What all do we need to carry around? Right? And there's lots and lots of problems like that the bill authors haven't thought through, because it's not about the policy. It's not about the policy. If it was about the policy, they would have a policy that actually works. The point is to feed into the fear and feed into the hatred that's been created in the past few years under COVID, where the right has continuously found an easy target in the Asian community, right? Starting like with Wuhan virus, Kung flu, and all this other garbage. It's easy to attack Asian Americans because it's a community that historically has never really fought back. So if somebody says like we should deal with national security, we should deal with national security. But number one, national security is done at a national level. with agencies that have access to intelligence services from the CIA, NSA, FBI, State Department, military intelligence. What does Texas have access to in terms of national security intelligence? But at the same time, if you're talking about national security, we've already passed that bill. We've already passed that law in 2001 or 2021. That was Senate Bill 2116 that said that foreign companies that are connected to foreign governments, companies that are directly connected to foreign governments cannot buy into critical infrastructure. So power, water, telecom, things like that. But this bill and this type of legislation includes all properties or all farmlands. What does somebody's house have to do with national security? What does a soybean field have to do with national security, right? It's all an excuse to do the same things that they have always done to immigrant communities, and that is ban them because we don't want them, because they're strange. They can never truly be American. And that's something that our community has struggled with since time immemorial.
Can I add something here?
Dave?
Sure. Just very quickly to echo it, I think the heart of this question is these are not decisions that should be made on a collective basis. They're decisions that should be individualized. And that's what the nature of due process is. This is a bill, to be very clear, this is not a bill about whom the state of Texas chooses to contract with. The state of Texas can choose not to contract with the government of China. This is a prohibition on any acquisition of property, not on the basis of what the person acquiring the property wants to do with it, not on the basis of their conduct, but on the basis of who they are. And so for individuals and corporations, as I said, the devil is in the details. And what we would want is we would want a system of due process that doesn't discriminate on the basis of origin of the human person or corporate entity at issue. And with that, I'll cede some space to the other panelists.
I would just add something here, very short. Even if the bill is watered down to some extent, prohibiting like non-immigrant visa holders from those 4 countries from owning land in Texas, it is still unconstitutional and dangerous. If a student visa holder is not able to buy real properties, or tourist visa holder is not being able to buy properties in Texas, those people are being labeled as agents of China or North Korea or Russia or Iran. And that's a really dangerous precedent. I just want to remind everybody, in 1982, a very famous case, Vincent Chan, he was beaten to death in Detroit because there was an anti-Japanese movement back in the 1980s, because the Japanese manufacturers of automobiles were taking over the US market. But Vincent Chan was mistaken as a Japanese. He was born and raised here as a US citizen. So if anyone is not safe here, any race, then nobody's safe. So this is a really dangerous precedent that we must stop in Texas.
Okay, here's a question. Would a law remove the specific countries but ban all non-resident alien be constitutional? Tennessee legislation HB 40 is proposing exactly that. Would somebody pick on that question? If a law removed the specific countries but ban all non-resident aliens, be constitutional?
It's a difficult question. It's much more difficult than in the context of SB 147, which does specifically target individuals from specific nations. A number of states have different restrictions on land acquisition, and states are traditionally thought to have the power to regulate land within their dominion. And so how we would look at that law really depends on the detail of it. I think there are likely arguments that could be made on behalf of certain groups of people who are restricted, but there is case law from the 1920s, which was admittedly a very different time, a much more racist time, explicitly racist time than we have now, but it upheld initially the California alien land laws on the basis that they extended these alien land laws to any immigrant not eligible to naturalization, which at that time included all Asian immigrants. Asian immigrants were not eligible to naturalization because only, quote, free white persons were able to naturalize in the United States until the 1950s. And so these alien land laws were, quote unquote, neutrally described because they didn't identify particular national origins or races. And the Supreme Court in the 1920s, in a series of cases, upheld those alien land laws. I think, as Mr. Shue was pointing out, there was the subsequent case Oyama, but Mr. Oyama was an American citizen who was born here, and the Supreme Court skirted this fundamental question. And then there were a series of state court decisions that I think are quite persuasive too. But it becomes a more difficult question if the state of Texas words the case more neutrally, or if Tennessee does the same, and fixes it to a determination by the federal government, I think is also a key.
I just want to add a little bit to what David just had said here. I think there is a big distinction between foreign citizens who are outside of the United States and the group of foreign citizens already living in the United States. And the latter group, I would argue, are entitled to constitutional protection for the equal protection under the 14th Amendment. So there is a valid constitutional argument to be made for foreign citizens. No matter whatever the visa status, they are entitled to that protection. I would also argue under the Federal Fair Housing Act, that law specifically prohibits racial discrimination. I think that argument can be also potentially used in a legal challenge.
Okay, there's an important question being raised. What are the actionable steps to take?
Sure. Yeah, can each of our panelists think a bit and give whatever answer you could have on the action to take from your own perspective?
Sure, I'll go first. Look, I mean, this is what we've been asking people from outside of the state to do. I mean, like, if you're in the state, we hope you will, get educated about it and tell your family, tell your friends, and ask them to join in with us and call, write, text, email your elected officials, your state senator, your state rep, and ask them to not support this type of legislation and to stop filing it, for one. But outside of the state of Texas, I think, well, it's not really, I don't think it's really that different. So, Congresswoman Shue said it best, and it says, this is not a one-off situation. This is just, this is the very tip of the spear, that this is going to happen across the nation, especially as tensions are ramping up between the US and China. People will be looking for this opportunity to basically use the Asian community, use the Iranian community, use the Muslim community as a scapegoat for the world's problems. I mean, I had conversations with people who said, well, good that they're doing this because, like, rent prices are so high. And my question is, like, what do Chinese people, what do Iranian people being able to buy a home have to do with rent? And so those kind of sentiments of people are unhappy with where the world is, and they're looking for someone to blame. And so I think all of us, every community that has been or can be a future target, should get together. We should join together and all push back against this. We should educate ourselves, educate everyone across the nation on what's going on this rising tide of anti-immigrant, anti-Asian, anti-Muslim sentiment. And we need to push back, and we have to fight back now before it gets worse. And I think the proponents of this stuff, they're counting on the community to do what it has always done, and that is to be quiet and to just, suffer quietly in the corner. We can't let that happen. This is the time for us to speak up. This is our time to rally. We shouldn't just have protests in Texas. We should have protests in California, in New York, in Chicago, all over the nation. We should have Asian Americans coming out. We should have our coalition partners coming out and saying, this is wrong. You should not treat every immigrant, every refugee, every visa holder, green card holder, or US citizen from these countries as an enemy. And we will not stand for it. That is fundamentally un-American, and we will not stand for this anymore.
Any other question from the audience? There's a lot of discussion in the chat room talking about how we should do. And I think that Lily too mentioned that they have over 100 organizations signed a petition, including on API, to stand along with us. Lily, do you want to say something? Let me give you the right to speak.
Hi, yes, thank you so much for organizing this. This has been so helpful, and just it's been great to see the support nationally from everybody with everything happening here in Texas. I'm representing Asian Texans for Justice, and we have pulled together a sign-on letter. We've gotten support from a number of local Texas organizations, including the Texas Civil Rights Project, a civil rights organization here, from the Texas Freedom Network, from Deeds Not Words, and so from a lot of organizations that are regularly advocating in the Capitol. So we really appreciate their support, because to what Representative Wu mentioned earlier, this is a repetition of what's happened in history, and without allies even outside of our community, it's a fight for us that we definitely need support in, and we can't do this alone. So please, anyone who's interested, feel free to sign on to our letter, and feel free to join us on March 9th. We'll be having a AAPI Day of Advocacy at the Capitol, and we hope to see everyone there.
Yeah, Lily, Representative Jim is calling a town hall meeting at 8 o'clock on Sunday. Would you please send me your email address? I'll make sure that you are invited.
Yes, I'll do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can other panelists have any response to the question, what we can do about this bill? And not necessarily as a resident of Texas.
I would just add one thing here. I think Gene has already talked about and covered so many things. I think the first thing the Chinese American community needs to do is actually raise awareness of this issue. Before Trump came into power, I personally did not pay much attention to what's going on until the WeChat ban came into existence, until the China virus issue become a national political term. I started really paying attention. It is the habit, and it's also the tradition of a lot of East Asian country immigrants to stay quiet and to put their heads down and just to make a good living in this country. It is not enough anymore. We came to this country, we deserve to be treated equally. This is an issue that needs to be educated, to be spread out. And just 2 days ago, I actually talked to my wife about this issue, and she didn't know about what's been happening in Texas, and I was shocked. It shows that how many people out there who are not paying attention to what's going on. This is a dangerous trend. We need to raise awareness. We need to show that we are united together. It doesn't matter you're a Democrat, you're a Republican, or you're independent. On the issue of racism, against Chinese Americans, we got to have this common ground. We got to be united. So that's kind of my point here.
Well said. Well said. Jamal, you have something to say?
Yeah, I'll offer. There's the campaign on the ground, which I think is really vital and is first and foremost. But for folks who are not in Texas, I think it's sort of just a matter of exercising your rights as a citizen and organizing through civil society organizations. So I have a feeling most people that are on this call are already probably doing that. But things like having a relationship with your elected officials, with your, at the local level and your members of the House and the Senate, having that relationship. Simply, being in touch with them, asking that they make a statement about this bill, that they condemn this, that they're aware of it. And doing that as an individual is great. Doing that as a collective, organized people is political power. And so, the group that you are a part of, make sure that they're working on this. Figure out how you can channel your efforts through organizations to, I think that, this needs to get more coverage in the media. And I think that this is, if it's not already, is quickly going to become part of a national conversation. I also expect it to be part of the upcoming presidential, primaries and the debate there. And so it's really important that we are in touch with our elected officials, that they are sort of preemptively considering these things and ready to stand up against them, and that we're building that power, through civil society organizations locally to be able to push back on this and to prevent this from coming to fruition. I think we're looking at Texas as, this is the beachhead. This is where we need to stop this. But I still think that, if you have the opportunity to be contacting your officials, to write letters to the editor in your local newspaper, be posting about this sort of thing, just raising the awareness, making sure that your network is aware, and organizing people. I think that's really what's important right now, so that we're ready for when this does come to other stages.
Okay, Janet, I give you permission to speak now. You may ask your question.
Yes. Hi, Janet here from Dallas. My question to Helen and you guys, Jean Wu, regarding SB 552. I have a meeting scheduled with the co-author of this bill, Senator Tan Parker. I already talked to his deputy chief of staff, and his position was that they are concerned, the senator is concerned that the anniversary states government's gonna buy U.S. farmland, and in case of a conflict, gonna cut off U.S. food supply. As they quoted some Wisconsin pork situation I'm not aware of, and also talk about what was the other one? So he told me he opposed SB 147, but he strongly pushed for SB 552. I have a call scheduled with him anytime now. I need help for rebuttal talking points regarding SB 552.
Jenny, can you tell us very briefly what is the other bill is about?
Yes.
I can help respond to that. It's I'm familiar with it. So when we passed the bill in 2021, it was Senate Bill 2116, and it basically said that if you're a company or a foreign government or a foreign government or a company connected to directly connected to a foreign government, you cannot purchase property that is adjacent to or has a critical infrastructure on it. So you can't buy land that has power, water, or telecom on it. And so what 552, and that was signed into law, and what 552 would do was it would categorize all agricultural land as a critical infrastructure. Okay. And so it's just like one of those things. I think that if you're just talking about things that are actual critical infrastructure, it's one thing, but to list the entirety, 90% of the state that is agricultural land, to say like, oh, you're not allowed to purchase this, and it would include, and I think they would include people, it could be very broad to where it covers, and it's just, it doesn't make any sense, and it's feeding off of unrealized fear, because I think the last survey that was done said that Chinese government ownership compared to all the other governments who own property, who own land in the US, only made up of less than, I think, 3% of the ownership. So the other 97% of land owned by foreign governments is totally fine, but somehow 3% of the total ownership is going to cause like mass starvation in the US. So, and again, look, I mean, if people want to find a reason to pass discrimination, they can. It's not hard. And you can, I mean, like back when they passed the alien land laws in the 1900s, back when they passed the Chinese Exclusion Act, everyone had good reasons back then. They had good policy reasons to do it. It wasn't just that we don't like these people, but they had policy reasons to explain why. But, you can always find an excuse. You can always find a reason to do something.
So what his staff try to make a distinction is Senator Parker does not target our people. He was targeting at the government. And he was so friendly to me at the individual level at that moment. I couldn't use this. I come to a point, I don't know what to say. That's my dilemma at that time.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was one of those issues. And we go back to the original bill that was passed in 2021. That just limited it to critical infrastructure, and critical infrastructure that is easy to identify, and you can understand the reason of why it's considered a critical infrastructure. But to say that all farmland is critical infrastructure is just insane. If it's a farmland, why not do all land? Why not? Because if you make an argument that says, well, farmland is food supply. Well, what about all lands that have water on it? That's water supply. What about, anything that else? Maybe a land that has a building on it that produces jobs. Well, it's employment issues. Where does it stop? Right.
In addition, I asked him, what is the vetting process? And this is the deputy chief of staff. He said the foreign company entity need to sign a affidavit process and need to be on record. Later on, if find out based on this law passed, if this entity turned out to be connected to, the affidavit meaning they are not connected to the government. If the company entity later on was found out to be connected to the government, the AG will take action. So that's the casual interaction I had with the chief of staff before the call.
Yeah, and that leads to all sorts of other questions of like, take action and do what? Do they have the power to roll back? Is there a legal process where they're allowed to roll back a transaction? What happens to the money? Does everyone get their money back? Does the agent's fees and the title fees and all that stuff, does that go back into the money? Does that all get returned to everyone? Who loses out when that happens? There's all sorts of questions, like practical questions that I don't think that a lot of people have not even bothered answering. And this is Look,
Are you working closely with Helen? I have offline email to Helen. I really need your help. Have some talking points.
Yes, we're looking at it. We're looking at it.
Thank you.
We're gonna have some talking points for you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. So Stephen, shall we open up to see anybody have one or two questions?
Yeah,
Raise
Helen
hands,
has a
and
question.
We allow two people.
Yonghua is the next.
Yes, hi everyone. This is Dr. Helen Shue. I'm a close colleague of Dr. Stephen Pei, Haipei, and everyone here, and been working with Representative Jing Wu since day one when this happened in Texas on the ground. So we have been doing quite a few recordings and interviews of our organizers, the key stakeholders, and I hope you all join us on our Facebook. We have a public group set up called Asian American for Justice Texas. Has a lot of material out there already. Our community has been organizing primarily on WeChat. So I have a few comments here. Action is so important, right? When everyone finish today's webinar, I hope you can all share about recording of this webinar and other materials with your friends and neighbors and whoever on your social media, because we need to build a broader coalition working together. Asian Americans only 5% of the population. Based on our power alone, it won't be enough. So we need to ask all of our American and whoever we can reach out to bring people together. And in particularly, we still have a lot of people on WeChat in our Chinese community who are not convinced, who thought that this had nothing to do with them, especially if they are a citizen, right? So this is something that this webinar is extremely helpful. I'm so grateful for every panelist really enlighten us about real core issue, right? Challenges we're facing and problem crisis we're going to drive right into. So the other thing is immigrants are builders, and we have built this country since the beginning as railroad workers, right? 150 years ago. But today we're also railroad builders for internet, for big tech, for the really economic backbone of this country. So many of us come here as STEM workers. We work in Silicon Valley's Texas Medical Center, so many large institutions, big corporations. So when those people come out together, they will have more voice than us. And I really hope if you are working with big tech, big corporations, large institutions, talk to your employer, talk to their, especially DEI, right? Diversity, equity, inclusive department. This is an issue that the whole nation, all of these big corporations need to come out to stand against. That's how we can build our power. The last comment I have is a lot of these legislators are our neighbors and our friends on the street. They do not understand the difficulty and challenges we have to go through as immigrants. They do not understand many of our friends have to be on working visa for 10, 20 years. Many of our friends have to go through that in order to become a green card holder. That process is so lengthy and so painful. So we also need to share our personal story and our experiences and to educate others, and so they can become our allies. Thank you so much, and really appreciate this.
Thank you. I think the next one is Yonghua. When we are waiting for he or she to unmute himself, let me make a couple announcements.
Can you hear me? Okay, I actually, as a Chinese American, that I'm very aware of the discrimination and very sensitive to discrimination. So it is important when something that discriminatory, we are jumping onto it. But don't shoot me yet. I feel like that for this time, are we jumping up too fast? Do we talk to the senator to understand, and maybe he will change or take it back and apologize before we take a huge action? As an American, I'm also concerned the safety of American people, and as a country, this is a democratic country, and we got a lot of freedom. That's why we want to stay here, because of the freedom. But if we use how do I say it? When something is overused and, you know, when people saying something and then get a, you know, big head of discrimination, are we, you know, I feel in a lot of places currently with political correctness that's actually harmful. Okay, I think that we, as a group, if we want to unite all the people, and we also want to be more reasonable, that's how I feel, and this discussion is very helpful to help us to understand what's actually going on. I am watching this, but I just feel like, you know, do we talk to that senator who raised this question, and are we also address the safety concerns as American? Thank you very much.
Okay, David, I saw you raise a hand, David.
Yeah, thank you for that question. And I'm sure the other panelists have thoughts as well. My first reaction is that what is happening here is sort of the heart and soul of American democracy and what it's all about. And I don't think you need to apologize for it. I don't think you need to hesitate. I think this kind of organizing and standing together is truly the core of the First Amendment. And it is precisely that freedom of speech and assembly that is what makes America the great nation that it is. And so I would speak loudly and proudly without any fear of retribution, because that is your right by being here. Then I would follow that to say, this is not too loud too quickly. The frustration is often these racist and discriminatory measures. They go too long without being called out and named for what they are. We can think of the civil rights struggle in the United States. We can think of situations like the Holocaust in Nazi Germany, where you have to understand that there need to be limitations, and those limitations need to be very strict and defined very quickly. Because what this bill does,
sir, you know, that's fine. You know, what I'm saying is that, you know, like if you, this one was not even become law or whatever, and that was not even discussed. If someone reads it, and we need to know the motivation of that person reads this. And if just because someone said something wrong and we jump right up, and that's very dangerous. As a democratic country, that's why I love this country, and I become a citizen, because the First Amendment is important, but it shouldn't be misused either. Thank you very much.
The one other thing, maybe I'll just add 2 quick points. The very first one is this bill specifically calls out individuals from specific countries, and that is very clearly unconstitutional. So it's not something that we need to doubt or hesitate or equivocate on. This is legally impermissible. And organizing when something is a bill, I think, is the best time to organize, rather than after something is adopted by the houses of the legislature and signed by the governor. At that moment, it can be too late. The bill becomes implemented. And so this early stage is exactly when the organizing needs to happen. But I think I also want to emphasize—
I fully agree on this point. I fully agree on this point.
May I just finish? I'm sorry, and then I'll see.
David, finish.
Yeah, the other point that I want to make is I think too often we're very deferential to people who introduce language like this. We want to give them the benefit of the doubt and say, oh, they must be reasonable. They must have our best interests at heart. But what I can communicate to you is that that is not how the Texas State Legislature or our governor or our attorney general work. What this is loud and clear a racist dog whistle. It is not a policy solution. It is not geared towards safety. It is profiting off of discontent, scapegoating immigrants, and targeting them with very particular and illegal legislation. And so we have to stand up at this moment and name it for what it is. You don't reason with racism, because racism doesn't want to reason with you. The way to respond to racism is to do precisely what is happening here, which is to organize across coalitions. It's for Iranian Americans, Chinese Americans, Russian Americans, Black leaders, groups like mine that represent a coalition of different racial groups, to stand up and say, if one of us, then all of us, and we organize together.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank
just
you.
because
Jen?
I just
Jen?
say really quick.
Go
Yeah,
ahead.
let me interject. I think, first of all, there are communication with not only author of the bill, but also co-author of the bill. So I think, Yonghua, you have made your point very clear already. I think, let me make two announcements here. One, I mentioned earlier that Jing Wu is calling a town hall meeting at 8 o'clock on Sunday. All the participants here, unless you refuse to accept future emails, I will send you the meeting notice and also the Zoom link for the Sunday meeting at 8 o'clock. Secondly, the question about the video of today's meeting, the video will be posted on YouTube after some editing. Thank you.
Okay, Jen, do you want to add anything to that? We're closing down here.
Yeah, no, I think David hit it right on the head. And I will say this, as a member of the Asian community, we don't really overuse the call of racism because we don't ever use it, even when it's really called for. And I think this is the one time that it's really necessary. And like David said, this is not a oops, I didn't mean to file this bill kind of thing. This is very intentional, right? Not just because of this bill, but because of the previous bills, because of all the other bills in all the other states, all the statements made by people, elected officials in other states, what Governor DeSantis has done, what Governor Abbott has done. We didn't find out about this bill until Governor Abbott tweeted about how much he likes it, right? So this is not a, oops, I made a mistake and I just said something. Somebody went and filed this bill that this senator had to request this bill, and the bill would be brought back to her for her to approve and then sign and then put into the system, right? And our office has continuously reached out to her office, and while they say they will change a few things, they are intent on keeping in language that basically says that all immigrants, all visa holders, all immigrants from these countries are agents of adversarial countries, right? That their actions, actions of immigrants from these countries are considered actions of these adversarial countries. So this is not a mistake. This is not a simple error. They might have gone a little farther than they want politically, but this is what they intended the entire time. And they only pulled back after they got this massive political blowback. And they think people have said like they would not even be compromising or offering the compromise unless we had this reaction. If we did not have this reaction, if we had done what the Asian community always does, which is be quiet and just suffer quietly, then they would have plowed on forward. Because we would have no ability to negotiate because we have no leverage. By us speaking up, by us giving them a hard time, by us making a big stink of this publicly, now at least we have political leverage to force them to make changes if possible, right? So, and if we started protesting and started doing all this when the bill started going through, and the bill is going through right now, if we waited till then to go start organizing, it would have been passed into law by the time we reacted.
Thanks, Jane. So let's wrap up here. Yeah, by the way, Stephen, we have posted Judge Singh and Judge Judah Tan's op-ed in San Francisco Chronicle, right? Okay. Now, so let me do this quickly, 1 minute in a reverse way. Thank you very much for finding time to come to this important webinar. My name is Haipei Shue, President of United Chinese Americans. And UCA has been, ever since its inception 60 years ago, at the forefront, fighting for the equal treatment of Chinese Americans, whether it is Sherry Chen, Xiaoxing Xi, Aimin Hu, Franklin Tao, these are all professors, or at the forefront fighting against China Initiative, fighting to keep the WeChat remain accessible by our community, or going to the core to the fight for the basic rights of international students studying in America. or working with CAPAC against many discriminatory and problematic legislation on the Hill that may harm our community. Fast forward to today, once again, our community is thrown into this huge challenge that we have not seen for a while. Texas legislation SB 147, and it is not just this tax bill, it is most likely also Florida bill. New Jersey legislature has already introduced a similar but milder bill. UCA chairman from Tennessee just informed me this morning that someone there has introduced a similar bill in Tennessee, HB 0040. We are now literally living in a brave new world of McCarthyism and anti-Asian hate combined. We don't have any other choice anymore but to organize and we have to fight like never before for our own safety, our livelihood, and our equal treatment. Before I end here, the last thing for today's webinar, I'll introduce my friend Ted Gong, Executive Director of 1882 Foundation, for their upcoming webinar. Ted?
Well, thank you for this. And this is a very insightful, interesting discussion. I really enjoyed the energy of this last 5 minutes or 10 minutes. It's really great. You know, we're 1882 Foundation. We look at the history of Asian American experience primarily. And we're not ones that says that history repeats itself, but there are echoes. And this law repeats itself quite a bit. So March 1, we're going to continue this discussion and take a dive historically at these type of anti-Asian alien land laws. So please join us. We're going to have a panel. Stephen Pei is going to be helping us to get that thing going, and that will be March 1. Here it is. These are the people that's going to be here. We are a pleasure to have Jean Wu to keep us honest on what's happening today on this thing, and we have a number of very distinguished historians and commentators. So please join us March 1, Wednesday, 6:30, and that's 6:30 Eastern time.
Thank you, Ted. And with that, we end up our conversation today. Again, this is the beginning of a fight, and let's all get together and do the best we can, whether you're in Texas or outside of Texas. Thanks again for our panelists.